Hi, my name is Aleksandra Kulbaka. I'm a software developer at Field UK. And today I would like to tell you everything you need to know about videos in React Native. I will start by telling you why I became interested in this topic and the library requirements that I came up with when looking for a perfect video library. Then I will walk you through the overview of different libraries. And finally, I will answer the question, is there a single best library to use? For the last year, I have been working on developing the multimedia application that supports reading content, listening to audio files, and recently we also wanted it to support playing videos. The immediate question we had in mind was what library to use. Because there are many different options, and each of these options supports slightly different features, so it was crucial that we list out the basic requirements before going into developing. So the video library that we were looking for must be reliable and stable. The multimedia app is being used by millions of users each month, so the video controller cannot just randomly crash or break. It needs to work in a bare React Native project. Our app was not set up using Expo, so the library couldn't be Expo only. It needs to render video from the URI, so we didn't have any local files. All the videos were hosted, and we were getting them from the URI. So it is important that the library obviously support that. We weren't very worried about supporting multiple videos on a single page, but it was important that the library will support rendering video in a flat list, because that's how we display most of the content in our app. It needs to render basic video controllers that will provide good user experience. What that basically means is that user needs to know what they are looking at, whether they are looking at the video or whether they are looking at just black screen, which is totally not what we wanted to do. And then finally, quite an important feature for us was the full screen mode support. And that was because most of the video content in our app was around 50-60 minutes long. So it was quite important that we give user this option to watch the video in a slightly bigger format. Cool. So after listing out all these requirements, I transformed them into the measurable criteria, which is ease of installation for React Native projects, basic functionality, which is play, pause, and move, full screen mode. As I mentioned, it's quite an important feature, so I decided to put it into the separate category. Enhanced functionality, something we can live without, but it would be really good to have, like rewind, forward, mute, or displaying the loading state, which is the placeholder image that is being rendered on top of the video component until the video is ready to be played. Then we have some UI appearance, general user experience, and finally the developer experience. So did they enjoy using this library? Was it well documented, etc.? After listing out all these criteria, I went on and tested different video libraries and rated them in each of these categories from score 1 to 5. It took me a solid few days to develop fully working video component, but I'm hoping that after listening to this talk, you will be able to do the same in less than a day. So without further ado, let's go through the overview of different video libraries. There are quite many options out there. I listed just the first few that popped up when I typed React Native video. It may be quite overwhelming because they all look quite similar, they have similar names. But then if you filter them out by the ones that are no longer maintained, and then if you identify the dependencies between libraries, you are left with two main options, which is React Native Video and Expo-AV. I started my exploration with React Native Video. The iOS installation was really straightforward. I basically just had to install the library and reinstall the pods, and the video component was working fine. I didn't notice any issues. It was. For Android, however, it was a completely different story. Technically, it was supposed to be all automatic. So after I installed the library, it will be automatically linked to my project, but that did not happen. the library, the app didn't even compile. The app immediately crashed when I tried to run it. Luckily for me, it turned out it was an easy fix. So basically, React Native Video versions 65 and above don't support JCenter anymore, but React Native Video still requires that as a dependency. So I had to add that in manually inside Android build.grade. After that, the app was working, but it was not what I expected it to look like. Basically, whenever I was scrolling up or down, the controllers were moving with me while the video stayed in place, which is the most horrific UX experience I saw. That was more difficult to fix. So, first of all, I had to change the React Native Video to use Android Exo Player by default to render the video controller. And I had to do it by configuring this in React Native config. And that was supposed to be it, but it wasn't. So I decided to manually link the library, following the docs. So I had to update the settings.gradle file, Android app build.gradle file, and main application.java. And finally, it was still not working. So on the bright side, it would work in like 90% of cases. However, as I mentioned before, we also support listening to audio files, and we do it by using the React Native track player library. And it turned out, obviously, the app was crashing, no errors whatsoever, so it was really difficult to debug. But it turned out that React Native track player and React Native Video both use the same native dependency, which is Android Exo Player, and they have incompatible versions of it. So the only way to fix that at that time was to use the patch package and patch the React Native track player to unify the Exo player version. So after all this struggle, the library was finally running. If you'd like to read more about this with more explanation and less memes, I wrote a video about that. Or if you need to do it yourself, I would recommend following that. Cool. And now, let's see how this libraries work in practice. Cool, so let's start with OS and let's refresh that. As you could see, the first thing we see is the poster feature. So I'm going to refresh again. So this poster is just the image that is being rendered on top of the video component. And it's quite useful because otherwise you would just see the blank screen. In here, it's fine because the Wi-Fi here is great. But if the user has really slow connection, that would just look like the empty rectangle, and the user would probably skip it. So yeah, React Native Video supports adding posters, so that's really, really cool. And then if we see how the video component looks like, we have big fat play button, so it's quite obvious that it's the video and not just the image. We can pause, play it. We can move it to a different timestamp. We can mute it if you would like to, and we can go to the full screen mode. Then inside the full screen mode, we have slightly more advanced controller. So we can, I always forget which one is rewind, which one is forward. But we have forward and we have rewind buttons. We can also mute the video, and we can zoom in if we want to. I don't know why we would want to, but we can do it. And then if we exit the full screen mode. So yeah, in my opinion, it looks quite nice. I personally don't have iPhone, so I just saw this video controller for the first time, and I think it looks quite aesthetic, and it's quite obvious how to use. So yeah, I really rate that. And now if we go to Android, and we can see the app already braked, so that's a great start. Okay, so the first thing we can see is that the poster feature is quite buggy. If we try again. Yeah, maybe because the video is already loading, but basically the poster sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, so it's less reliable than on iOS. And the video controller looks completely different. One of the biggest drawbacks for me is that if you don't touch it for a couple of seconds, the controllers just disappear. So all you can see is just black rectangle. So you have no idea what you're looking at. Then if we play it, we can see that the button sometimes disappears. And then it appears. So that's really fun. We can move it. We can forward. And we can rewind. And we have these two buttons. One of them takes you back to the beginning of the video, and the other one is supposed to take you to the end of the video, but it never works. So we have just this messy UI with like two buttons, completely useless. And the biggest drawback for me was the lack of full screen mode. The icon was supposed to be right here, but it just wasn't rendered. It wasn't mentioned in the official docs, but I saw on GitHub issues, a lot of people had this issue with newer versions of React Native. So yeah, that was the biggest drawback. As we can see, the pain of installation and the lack of full screen mode feature on Android was reflected in the score, and it also affected the developer experience and general user experience. It's worth mentioning that React Native Video is working on the new version right now. I think they released a version 6 alpha, but it's not officially available right now. They are planning to fix some of the installation issues, but I haven't seen anything mentioning the full screen mode fix. So it may be a little bit better, but it may not fix the issues that we're currently having. On iOS, however, basically gave it 5 out of 5. It was a really, really good experience, and I'm really glad I started with iOS, because if I started with Android, I don't think I would be even bothered to check iOS. But yeah, for iOS, it was a great experience. I would definitely recommend. Then, if we move to Expo-AV, and that's another library I was testing, I wasn't quite sure if I can use it at the beginning, because I was afraid I will have to set up my app using Expo in order to be able to use this library. Luckily though, you only need to install Expo modules, which is another library, and then after that install Expo-AV, and you can use this library in better React Native projects. So that's really cool, and the installation process is basically the same for Android and iOS. Few installation tips. The first one may seem quite obvious: install one library at a time. When I was testing it, I created the basic app, like simple React Native app, and then install both of these libraries in there. I remember I couldn't believe how easy it was. I think I remember I messaged James on the weekend, I was like, oh my God, it's working so great. So I was really confident after that, when I had to do the same thing for my other app, that it's just gonna work fine. And surprise, surprise, it didn't. I just got hundreds of errors after I installed these two libraries. And because I wasn't checking in the meantime, I had no idea which installation caused the problems. So it was super difficult to debug. So take your time, do it one installation at a time, follow the docs. The docs are really good, and it should be great. Before you do that though, make sure to update your React Native version. Before we did that, we had a lot of random errors, and after we updated React Native version to the newest, most of them just disappeared, so that's really cool. Similarly to that, upgrade the Kotlin version. We couldn't make the Android app running until we upgraded the Kotlin version. That was basically the fix to all the errors that we've been getting. So make sure you update your dependencies and install the one library at the time, and I'm sure you will be fine. Now, if we compare Expo-AV to React Native Video, let's go to option 2. Again, we could see the flash of poster right there. One thing I should mention is that the poster feature doesn't work quite that well as it worked on React Native Video. If I just give the poster URI to the library, it basically renders it all the time, even after the video is loaded. And that means you cannot use the video anymore. So it's quite an easy fix. You need to do some conditional rendering, that if the video is ready to be played, remove the poster. So it's a very easy fix, a couple of minutes, but it's still something you need to do manually. So not quite automatic as it was in the previous library. Then if we check the actual controllers, it looks pretty much the same as the React Native video. Exactly the same controllers. And another minor issue is that Expo-AV does not support full screen mode by default. So you need to write the code to support full screen mode yourself. Again, it's not that much of a pain because the library in the GitHub example folder gives you all the code that you need to copy and paste, basically, and just add some little tweaks. So again, it's like a couple of minute job, but still, it's not something that is done automatically. You need to do it yourself. Then if we move on to Android, and I think we could see the poster, finally. Let's try again. Oh, that's great. Oh, maybe not. The poster is just buggy for Android in general. As we can see, I think the controller looks much neater now because we don't have these random buttons on the top left, like on the bottom right, bottom left and bottom right. So we just have the buttons to play, rewind and forward. But the biggest advantage of this library is the full screen mode support, which I was super, super happy about. The code for iOS and Android full screen mode is the same. So once you write it, you don't need to adjust it to the platform. And yeah, it's working really, really well. I tested thoroughly for a couple of hours. So yeah, it's really, really cool. For Android, as you can see, the biggest difference between Expo-AV and React Native Video is the ease of installation. It was much, much easier. I gave it 4 out of 5 because of this another dependency that you need to add. I decreased the rating for both iOS and Android by 1 star for full screen mode and the loading just because you had to do it yourself. Android does not support mute function, so I also decreased that by 1. But in general, I really, really enjoyed using this library, and I would definitely recommend it. So now, kind of as a summary, I would like to answer the question, is there a single best library to use? And I think not really. And the reason for that is that it hugely depends on your requirements, because both of these libraries have pros and cons, and you just need to weigh them up. So, for example, if you have legacy code base with a lot of outdated dependencies, I would recommend you go for React Native Video, just to avoid the pain of updating all the dependencies and then installing Expo-AV, although you should probably update your dependencies anyway. Or if you have really big code base with already many, many dependencies, and you don't want to add another many dependencies, then probably go for React Native Video, just because it's one library and not 2. Or maybe if you don't care about Android experience that much, so if you are not bothered by lack of full screen mode on Android, or if you don't need to have the unified experience between iOS and Android, then also go for React Native Video. If, however, the videos are a key feature in your app, or if you have just created a project, you'd probably set it up with Expo, and the choice would be obvious. Or, yeah, if you just created the project, definitely go for Expo-AV. If you want a unified experience, then yeah, definitely go for Expo-AV. So in my case, I went for the second library, but I wanted to iterate that again, that your choice would hugely depend on your requirements. But I hope that this choice of choosing this library will be much easier after this talk. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you tested the full screen mode in landscape.
Yes, I did.
And did it work with both?
Yeah. I don't know if I can show you on simulator. Let's see. It definitely works in the real device.
Oh,
yes. Nice, and then I don't know how to do it for Android.
That's okay. No one cares about Android, right?
But yeah, even if you have disabled the landscape mode in your app, this library is still gonna overwrite it, so you can still use it in the landscape mode, even if your app doesn't support that.
In both libraries, was that? Or?
Yes. So in the Expo-AV, you would have to do it manually because you need to implement the full screen mode manually. But yeah, there's just one line to change in order to do that.
Have you experimented with performance differences if you have a bunch of videos on a flat list?
That's a really good question. I haven't done any tests using any plugins, but I noticed that the Expo-AV was slightly faster on my very old Android device. So yeah, it should be faster, but I haven't done any official testing.
I just want to ask if it supports live streaming, like HLS videos, either of them.
Oh, let's see. So it should support all the types that Android and iOS support. So if I suppose Android or iOS, they both should support the live stream. Yeah. So
we've been using Expo-AV for a while, but the main thing we've found that's an issue is that it doesn't support subtitles. Was that something you looked at in your project, or did you find a workaround or anything?
That's a really great question. So I didn't think of that because we didn't have any subtitles for our videos, so I didn't need to consider that. But yes, you're right. I was looking at this actually yesterday, and I couldn't find any properties to support subtitles.
So I guess there's a bit of a trade-off right now that you have to accept the other issues.
Definitely, yeah. If you're looking for accessible library, then I guess React Native Video.
And do you ever use React Native for the web as well? Is that something you've tested?
No, I haven't. But that's a really great point with the subtitles. Thank you.
Do you think Google should just get their act together? Because quite frankly, what you're doing is relatively simple. And if they can't render videos properly, they should think about what they're doing, right? Because, it's been too long.
Totally agree.
Sorry.
Anyone else? There we go. All right, go here first.
It's just what's option 3?
Oof, mystery option. I was wondering where to put it in the presentation, but it just destroyed my flow, so I didn't. Option 3 is Expo Video Player, and this is the library that is depending on Expo-AV. So basically, when you choose your base, so basically React Native Video or Expo-AV, then you can experiment with the libraries that depend on it, as I showed here. So Expo-AV depends on Expo Video Player depends on Expo-AV. But as you can see, it's slightly more aesthetic. It's definitely more simplified, and it looks exactly the same on Android. So for example, that would be a good option if you want to render background videos that you don't need to control. That would be horrible in terms of accessibility. But if you like to do it, then I think this one would be a good option. But this was just to see, to show you that you can, if you choose Expo-AV, you're not just choosing one library. You can choose many different libraries that depend on it.
Could you use React Native Video to upload videos, not from the code, but from the app itself?
From the local files. Yeah. So they both support local files and they both support URIs. Actually, did this one as a backup option. I wasn't sure how the Wi-Fi is going to work. I have the local file video right here. So yeah, they both support local files.
Are there any other criteria that you would consider other than the ones that you've listed up?
That's a really good question. Yes, so I think the accessibility one, as you mentioned with the subtitles, that would be definitely a big one. If you know you have the data, then definitely take that into consideration. In our case, we knew that we're not going to get subtitles anytime soon, so we just skip that, but you should definitely think of accessibility. Yeah.
Do you look at all at offline or caching the videos to the device? So if you go offline...
I think it's a couple of seconds, maybe 15 seconds or something, but I may be lying right now. Yeah, I think it's a couple of seconds caching.
I will finish off with a question myself, actually. So
You mentioned that with Expo-AV, you needed to also install Expo modules. I'm wondering if you actually did an analysis of how large your actual app size became and which one was a smaller, I guess, bundle.
I haven't. My suspicion would be that the Expo modules will be quite big because they allow you to support basically any Expo library in your app. So I would guess that the Expo-AV, but I'm not sure.
Cool.
Thank you very much.